you'd like to contact the show, send us an email at liveonfourlegspodcast@gmail.com or get involved in the conversation on social media. Join the Pearl Jam Podcast community group on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at liveonfourlegspod.
I'd like to introduce you to our friend, really good friend and now bandmate, Jack Irons. I heard Gloria came out and spoke before, and she mentioned Jack's name. There are actually a few boos out there, and I know where that comes from. And that's really nice that you said, or I think you were talking about that. You were thinking about Dave, yeah. So that's really cool. But I'll tell you right now, Jack Irons saved the life of this band. So thank him. And away we go.
You're listening to Live on Four Legs, the live Pearl Jam podcast experience, featuring
Mr. Stone Gossard. Gentlemen, Mama Queen. Matt fucking Cameron in the drum. Mr. Boom Gasper. You can call me Al, you can call me Ed, you just fucking call me, why don't you?
everybody now. Welcome to Live on Four Legs, a definitive live Pearl Jam podcast. And while last week we looked back one more time on 2024, now we can really look forward into what 2025 is going to be. And it's a perfect way to kick off because there are a lot of really good anniversaries this year. There's the Binaural tour celebrating the 25th anniversary. You want to feel old? Well, there you go. You also want to feel old. The 2005 tour on its 20th anniversary. That is pretty crazy. And even 2010 being on its 15 year. Yeah, I went to a lot of those shows too. So it's feeling like it's getting up there in age. But when this band has been around for so long, you just can't help it. And they go back such a long way that today actually brings us to the 30th anniversary tour of 1995, the Vitalogy tour. And it's a great way to start because this show that we're doing tonight is the Vote for Choice show that they did at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. And we're going to be doing the night one show because that was a better and more interesting story for bootleg quality and had some video to it as well. And we get to hear from a little bit of Neil Young in this. We get to talk about some of how difficult it was to get tickets for this show. You got Self Pollution Radio that happened a couple of days before this. You got Jack's first live show that wasn't a Bridge School show. So now Jack is really being introduced to this Pearl Jam crowd. And you got sort of the early stage of Mirrorball. This is really where this all starts. And it kind of starts even 2 days before this at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where Ed inducts Neil and they end up playing Act 11. We'll get into all that. So why not just celebrate the anniversary, the first legitimate show of 1995, which is basically 30 years ago, almost to the date. So let's just jump right in. Randy Sobel over here. And over there today, since Javier is still out in South America, he'll be back next week, but we have a great friend and a great guest on from the Hallucinogenic Recipe podcast, which they need to do some more stuff this year, guys. I don't think we had maybe one episode of Hallucinogenic Recipe last year. I can't remember, but we invite today Brian Harwitz is on the show. He's over there. Brian, what's going on? When was the last time that you recorded anything? I can't remember at this point.
It's been a while. You need to light that fire. We got to do some more stuff. I agree. How's it going, everyone?
It's great. It's great. And it's great to have you on. And we were supposed to have Patrick on too. And we had a couple of missed opportunities and we just kind of landed here. So while Patrick is here in spirit, we'll have to kind of poke the bear and say, hey, let's get us back on this little roll here because you guys were doing some great episodes. And I hope that we get some more this year. I'm going to really make sure that we do. But this is a good one because this is right in your wheelhouse, 1995. This is a bootleg that's circulated. So when you think of a show like this, what comes to mind?
I'm old is what comes to mind when I think of this one. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. 30 years ago, and this was right kind of in the era that I was collecting bootlegs. I think, yeah. I mean, you sort of said it all there, right? The first show of what would be kind of a crazy year for the band, and I think that bootleg, there's a vibe to it. You can kind of hear just the way it sounds and the way the band sounds and the way Jack sounds on drums. It sort of sets the stage for the next several months and actually throughout the end of the year in November, those final shows. So there's a lot of storylines that we need to get to. A lot going on here for a pretty short show. There's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. I think the big storyline for me is probably that out of this, we book some sessions to record with Neil that happened in late January, and that ultimately ends up being the Mirrorball sessions. And we do have a song from Mirrorball in this show that was really Pearl Jam's first foray with playing it, Act of Love. That was kind of the first time that they ever messed with it. And then when we get to hear it later, you'll hear like, okay, this is what they were trying to go for with this song, and you'll hear the differences because it's really fascinating the way that it ended up on the record, almost pretty close to what they did, but we'll get into that when it's time to. I think let's go into how you were able to get tickets for this show. So they were available via postcard, mail-in lottery system, and over 175,000 postcards were received for 3,700 seats for each show. So that's 7,400 people. And I'm sure that people got in for both shows because they never end up doing the right thing with that. There are always people that always get into both. But yeah, that's just so crazy. And it kind of kicked off a year where getting tickets to Pearl Jam was just insane. It was exactly like this. I mean, they controlled this one, which they weren't necessarily controlling all of them, but they weren't using Ticketmaster this year. So if you're in the 10 club and you're looking to go and see them this year and sending in a postcard for this, I mean, that got to be your signal. Like, it's not going to be easy. You got to do work in order to go see Pearl Jam in 1995.
Yeah, at a small venue for a certain cause, for sure. I just did the math. I pulled up my little calculator. Only 4% of people got tickets. Let's put it that way, right?
That's almost as much as Florida.
Yeah. Thinking back to this era as well, I mean, you think about a 7,000 seat venue with 170,000 people, sending in a request for it. You also have to remember, too, for a lot of people, this was at the absolute height of this band's popularity, right? I mean, between kind of late 92 and then sort of into 95, I mean, it's about as big as a band gets. They were one of the biggest bands on the planet, if not probably the biggest band at some point there. So, and this is just sort of 10 club people. It's crazy how big this band had gotten by that point. And yeah, I mean, doing the math, like I said, it's next to impossible to win tickets to these. So anyone who did go to one of these shows, I mean, yeah, absolute jealousy for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily think that in most cases that Neil would be the opener for Pearl Jam, but I mean, because they are at the top of their game, they're at the top of their popularity here, coming off a big album and verses, and they had already made record-breaking sales for Vitalogy as well. Neil's going to take a backseat to that, and I think Neil getting involved with that is also saying like, I don't know if he wants to piggyback off the success, probably not that, but he's saying you guys have something really special and I want to see what we can do. I want to make songs and make a record with a band that is doing it at the height of their game right now. Now, this is a vote for choice show. And as we've talked about before, it was pretty common to get vote for choice shows around this time. They did a couple in 1994, they did some in 1993. And it's all about registering people to vote and spreading awareness for women's rights. And somebody that was heavily involved with that for the whole time that Pearl Jam was doing it was Gloria Steinem. She is at this show. And it's interesting because you think now it's 30 years ago and you kind of don't remember that she had such an important connection with this band and doing this stuff. But here she's been at every show, it seems that they've done a vote for choice. And it's important when you look back on
Yeah, they picked her postcard. What are the odds?
it. Well, I think she might have had an in. I think she
Ah,
might have
right. Fair enough.
she might have been roadie for L7 that night. Who knows?
She helped Dan Peter set up his drum kit that night. That's good.
So you got that. I think we got to talk a little bit about self pollution too, because it's just
Yeah.
kind of building up that hype of what's going to happen, what this band is going to do this year. And a lot of what they're going to do, especially Ed, is just his DIY projects, going on the road and doing the radio through a van and doing pirate radio stuff. And self pollution was kind of their way to get some new music out there, not just from themselves, but Mad Season basically is introduced to the world that show. Soundgarden played some songs, Fastbacks played some songs, and I had some guests on like Mike Watt to promote the Ballhogger Tugboat record. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And I think for the Pearl Jam universe, and especially as you were saying that they're at the height of their popularity here, this is just more fuel to add to the obsessive fan wanting more and more and more. And also coming off of the Atlanta show, which was on every single radio station, super, super important. Do you remember listening to Self Pollution?
I remember listening to the 98 one live, but not 95. I knew about it, but I didn't have it until I think I bought a bootleg CDR of it at one point, like maybe that summer, but I didn't hear that one live over the radio. No, unfortunately. I think the only thing to sort of add to that is that, like I was saying earlier, this is clearly the show we're talking about is the kickoff of the Vitalogy tour proper. But Self Pollution, like it's crazy for the band to be like, yeah, let's sort of warm up and do some practice. Do a run through of these songs as if it's a live show, and we'll broadcast it for everyone, warts and all. It's like their sound check broadcast to thousands of people. Just what a great idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, they were savvy and they were on top of that, and I don't know why more bands didn't do something like that. It just gets your name out there, and it's something, especially for like high schoolers, middle schoolers, to have like the radio under the pillow. I'm sure you youngins that are listening to that right now have no idea what it's like to have a radio under your pillow when you fall asleep at night. But I used to do that, listening to baseball games and the radio or just my boombox or whatever, but it was something that happened. So they were so ahead of their time with
Yeah,
certain aspects of
absolutely.
all this. And I think for the most part what they wanted to do was they just wanted to play live, and they just wanted to share that with people that maybe in places where they can't afford to go see them or whatever have you. But it got so many more people. I mean, we're talking 175,000 here to want to go and venture to see this band. It blew up, is what happened.
They were using like kind of modern technology too, and continuing that spirit of like the Grateful Dead and Fish and those bands, and kind of bringing it to the next level, right? I mean, this whole openness for people to trade their shows early on, and obviously they then caught on to that and started releasing them all themselves. But that fueled the fan base. I mean, Eddie was always a big fan of people bootlegging shows, so I think like to broadcast a show for just whoever wants it on the radio, like I still have my Atlanta '94 tapes because I can't get rid of them. I think that's to your point. It's like, hey, the fans want this. We don't want people to pay an arm and a leg for bootlegs out there. So let's see what we can do to get some of this music into the hands of people.
And speaking of that, so this bootleg is very interesting because it's soundboard quality. It's terrific. We have video from it, and it was real breeze to watch. I mean, it's short too, which helps, but it was just a joy to be able to listen to them in this era, sounding this crisp. What do you know about the bootleg? Since that's you and Patrick, that's your wheelhouse right there. I saw that Pat tweeted something, a CD called Boundless. How far back does this bootleg go, and what's the story behind it?
So that's a good question. I was actually hoping he would hop on. He's always good for those little tidbits about old school bootlegs and timing, et cetera. I know it was a Basecamp production. I want to say there was a leak as well, although I'm not sure about that. I don't particularly recall this one in the tape trading circles when I was this was like the height of when I was trading. It was sort of like 94, 95, 96. And I don't remember seeing this on a lot of people's lists. So I didn't actually catch on to this show for a couple of years. Sometime probably either late in my tape trading days or early CDR days, like maybe even 98 or so. So I'm not sure. I do know there were a couple of titles that had this, like kind of looking back now, but I don't recall like seeing them in some of my like favorite bootleg stores up in Burlington that I've talked about all the time.
Yeah, this is not one from 1995 that I think is like near the top of the ones that you had to have. Like when I think
Right.
of the best from this year, obviously I think you're going to go to Red Rocks. I think you're going to go to the San Diego shows that happen in November, and basically everything in November. You guys have covered that before. The
Yep.
Salt Lake City shows, San Jose, everything that happened that month. And I think maybe because this was sort of a smaller thing, especially at the beginning, because really it's just going to be these two shows, Piss Bottle Men shows that happen at the Moore. And then they do one Missoula show before heading over to Japan and a lot of places that they haven't played since, like Singapore and Taiwan, and then going down to Australia, New Zealand area. But I think maybe this kind of mixes in with those a little bit more than it mixes in with when you're talking about the June, July stuff. Soldier Field, I'd be remiss if I don't mention Soldier Field. That's the huge one. That's the obvious one. They just had so much material that was circulating around this time that something could slip through the cracks. But the amazing thing is that since everything became readily available online somewhere at some point in the 2000s, everybody has access to everything. So you can just go back, and if you didn't have a bootleg, this is a good question for you. Was there a bootleg that you never ended up getting, but when everything went digital, it was like the first one you were like, I have to go and listen to this? Was there one that was like that?
That's a phenomenal question. Let me think about that. I know it sort of went in stages, right? Like I remember first tape trading gave way to sort of CDR trading. I remember getting my first 4 times speed read write CDR burner, which I thought was the coolest thing ever, my little external burner. I remember trading some shows then, and then you were off to like the Napster, Morpheus, Kazaa days, and who knew the quality you'd be getting there. And then BitTorrent, and that's when things really took off there. We had an awesome internet connection at the place I used to work in like the early 2000s where I could sort of download anything. I'm trying to think if there was a show that I was like, I got to go back and listen to it. I remember Murfreesboro, the March 94 show. I never had that on tape. I don't think I had that on tape, but because of Dock of the Bay, I was like, I need to go back and listen to the rest of that show. That was one. I think I filled in the gaps on, I loved, you've heard me and Patrick talk about obviously the Zurich 92 show till we're blue in the face. I think I went back
Oh
and
yeah.
filled in some of the gaps there of shows I didn't have. Like I always had like London and Pink Pop and some of those other ones, but like Berlin and like Paris and Copenhagen, I remember going back and being like, well, shit, like I love June 92. What do I not have from June 92? So yeah, I think those are some of the ones that stand out that I had to go back and get.
So we do have one more storyline tied into the show that we have not mentioned yet. And that is good old friend Jack Irons. This
Yes.
is kind of technically his first legitimate show, because when you go back to the 1994 Bridge School shows, he's not officially in the band. He is helping out, and he's there. And I think there's probably a sense that they want him around. I know that he jumped in on the recording of Stupid Mop, and he was there for that to finish up Vitalogy after Dave had gotten fired. But this is really the start of his era, and you'll see all throughout the year, like those Vitalogy songs fit so well in his wheelhouse. There's so many that we're going to hear from this show that Jack is just money on, and they're going to evolve. Like this being the first show, there's a sense that you get from a song like Immortality where you're like, okay, I see what the potential is with something like this. I can see where they're going to go with this later in the year. And that would absolutely be a defining factor for what this tour is. But in this year, you're able to see those little hints, and he's still getting acclimated. But boy, it's the right direction with this group. So we'll talk about Jack as we get into the show. There's obviously going to be no shortage of storylines with that. So why don't we just jump into the set list here? This is the start of the Vitalogy era, and you're starting off with a 10 song here. This is kind of going to be sectioned. After 10, you're going to have 5 Vitalogy in a row, and then you're going to dip into some verses and dip into a little bit of 10 afterwards, but you're going to open the show with the song that is still a strong opener even till this day, and that is Release. About this version of Release, it has like the very slow pluck from Stone, and while it's not necessarily a hypnotic version, it was a very pleasant rendition that kind of felt a little bit soothing. And when that kind of all develops and you kind of build into the big moments, that's when you truly get to feel Jack, and his rhythms are elevated as the song evolves. And the differences between somebody like Jack and Dave A, I mean, we can talk until we're blue in the face about that, but Jack was able to build and make those moments even more cathartic and feel, I guess, the energy of a song like Release and kind of understand the character of it as well. And once you get down to just the big moments where Ed is teeing off and everything like that, like, Jack is definitely the one to listen to on this. It almost, in the other parts, it feels a little bit raw and stripped down, but full when you dig into the full band stuff.
I think it's a beautiful version of Release. To your point, maybe doesn't hit certain peaks a certain way, but I think it sort of also sounds like a 95 Release. I think Eddie's voice also sounds really good. He hits all those notes kind of perfectly. In general, it sort of lets you know that it's going to be a pretty good vocal night for him. There's no real signs of strain. I mean, obviously, as the March tour sort of wrapped up and then into the summer, you can tell that he had some sort of vocal strain, but it's not noticeable here. I think he sounds great on this version. A little subdued, but he sounds great.
Oh, yeah, and that'll, I mean, going into the next couple songs, you can tell a song like Spin a Black Circle just how crisp he sounds and effortless within his voice. And I really love how the song for Release ends, almost goes out like a lamb and is so mellow to end, and then you hear that riff come in for dun, 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 and it's just, all right, start opening the floor and really hear the fuck is the Vitalogy era to start. Spin a Black Circle, Last Exit, Tremor Christ, I think those songs together are no surprise. And a couple of these songs have a little bit of a rough start, but they find their way on the path rather quickly. I think Spin the Black kind of had a little bit of an issue on one or two measures, but you don't necessarily notice it for the whole song. But for that song especially, the vocals are fantastic. And Ed has this big scream before going into the bridge breakdown, and the band is just riding on top of it. The momentum, the first song into the next few, is continuing to build already, and you can tell something is happening on stage. It's very good.
I agree. The scream in the bridge is phenomenal, and then Mike sort of wailing during the end as well. A little a la Self-Pollution Radio, a little kind of continuation of what he was doing there. But I agree, a little rough out of the gate, and then it picks up steam and is kind of a fiery version at the end. I think it's great.
On Last Exit, you have a really great view of Jack, and I think it's like one of my favorite Jack songs to hear him on because it just comes through the speakers so well. And that pop that he has in his snare is just perfect for the song. And you just watch him, like every time he goes for a fill or something like that, you just like watch his head and you watch his head movements. And the difference is because he's very animated when he drums, yet somebody like Cameron, and I'm just going to throw this out there because Cameron is really, as you guys probably know, is one of a kind, but I've never seen a drummer have as good as a posture that Cameron has when he's behind the kit. And you notice it so much when you watch somebody like Jack, who's like very hunched over and he's bopping around, and Cameron is just shoulders up, straight up, and effortless. It's interesting that they've had so many different drummers that have had just different personalities as how they drum, and Dave was kind of in not the same way as Jack, but like a lot of movement with Dave as well. I think he just felt the rhythm a little bit differently, but Jack was just, I mean, it looked like he was working anytime that he was playing a crazy song like this.
Yeah, absolutely. He had his own style for sure. I always felt after like watching some of his shows that he's got to be exhausted afterwards. There's a lot of like vertical up and down, kind of head bopping, to your point, kind of hunched over. Not that we're talking about this show in particular, but the video of the kind of new Jeremy version from Red Rock shows that a lot, where he's doing that kind of bopping up and down sort of thing. And I always think like, man, he's got to be tired. Like there's a lot of wasted movement, but clearly like it's not wasted. He's feeling it, right? That's just his sort of body groove as he's getting into songs. And I think, yeah, Last Exit and then into Tremor Christ is clearly like, that's his sort of vibe. I think Tremor Christ is a great one because when it kicks in, I was actually just trying to refresh my memory on this one and listening to it earlier, and I had forgotten how nice and grooving that version is too. It's not kind of fast out of the gate. It's like Tremor Christ, it's got like a funk to it almost. It's just got this perfect pace.
Yeah, I always call that the pace that kind of like Jeff can sort of take the lead on a little bit, and I think it was a little bit of Jeff, a little bit of Jack on this. It's full Funhouse version, almost like in a sense that Wash, like the progressive rhythm of Wash, it's moving and like the chords just kind of gravitate a little bit, and it's, I don't want to say this word, but it's almost in a sense like it can make you feel like you're on a rocking boat and almost make you feel a little queasy. It's not necessarily how you feel when listening to the song, but the same sensation. I get a lot of that out of Tremor Christ, and something that I love about Jack versions, 1995, 1996, where this song was absolutely perfected, is that they were just able to tap into that identity. Yeah. And yes, we're lucky if we get to hear this song, and we did this year, and that's fantastic. It should never go away. But this is the kind of song that when they play it nowadays, it feels like, and this goes with just about any song that isn't necessarily in the fold every night. Like you play it and you get it to sound good, and you just want to get the song to sounding like how the song is. But boy, some of these Vitalogy songs in this era just had that character to them, and I don't think they can make Tremor Christ sound like this anymore 30 years later.
No, it's yeah, I always use that word with Jack. It's got that tribal thing that, you know, I think you can more easily compare Dave and Matt's drumming styles than you can Jack. I think Jack is sort of the outlier, and I think like he does songs like Tremor Christ, that's just in his wheelhouse. I mean, you can almost imagine him writing that drum part, like what it would have sounded like for him to be on the studio version of it, because it's an In My Tree, it's a Who You Are, it's almost like a Given to Fly. It's got that sort of vibe to it. It feels like his song.
Absolutely. When I think of the drummer that I associate with Tremor Christ, it's 100% always Jack. Something's going on here in between. Stone is asking where Jeff is while fixing Ed's mic, And then Ed says, I wish I was going to play some guitar for you, but Neil must have blown a fuse or something. So we get a quick snippet of Wish You Were Here that gets played
Yep.
as Ed gets strapped into his guitar for a couple of Ed back to backs here with Corduroy and Not For You. But the storyline's not Ed. The storyline is Stone Gossard. Holy cow. Not one.
Yeah.
Not For You is a traditionally known Gossard solo song. Corduroy? How about that? I don't remember the last time, and maybe this is because it's just so early in the tour that they're trying to feel it out a little bit, and they're trying to be like, oh, do we want there to be like a Stone section and a Mike section in this? But Stone absolutely whips the crap out of that solo on Corduroy. It was incredible. And like the groove that's leading up to it too, like everything's building so well. And I mean, he's got the facial features and everything, and he's looking down. And this was a good era for him. I felt like he's always, whenever he's soloing, I mean, like he is the happiest person in the world. But boy, this is a treasure to watch Stone go off, especially on Corduroy.
Yeah, it's almost a precursor to some of the Neil stuff. I mean, to me, it's a Neil Young kind of esque sounding jam, right? I think that's where Stone kind of shines at the end of that song. I think it's a fantastic version. I think first and foremost, you got to go back to the beginning of the song, and we're talking about Jack. I love the way Jack used to play that intro with that sort of doom ba dooka ticka doom. Like he's kind of offbeat with what Eddie's doing on guitar to lead into it. His timing is impeccable doing that. And then I will say, it's not my favorite version of Corduroy ever, but it's kind of up there in that maybe top 5 or 6. But it's maybe my favorite vocal version of Corduroy. Eddie really takes some liberties with how he, especially in the first verse, but it continues into the second verse. The way he sort of howls some of the lyrics there, there's an aggression to it that's not in a lot of other versions. I've always loved the way he sings, especially the verses in particular. He does something very different, and I don't know of other shows in other versions that have quite that kind of fiery, kind of jabbing sound to it. But whatever he's doing there, I love it.
I fully agree with that intro for Corduroy. Anytime you get the long, drawn-out Corduroy intro where you're building up to that moment, there's nothing like it. Jack just, it's extremely impressive. Not For You, very heavy on distortion and impact on this. The dichotomy of just going full force through the first couple verses and then just peeling back almost to the way where you can hear like a pin drop in the bridge where they're building back into the song. Just little things like that. Again, you're building character with these Vitalogy songs. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I love Stone solo and Not For You, and I love, to your point, the kind of very chill middle part. Great lead up into the ending chorus there, and kind of fiery ending. And to me also, there's obviously like the earlier versions of it that I love from like, March 94 and some of those earlier ones. I think this and Self Pollution clearly solidify that Eddie's going to back off a couple of the F-bombs a little bit there and make him a little bit more subtle. It's not quite as angry in the same way that the original couple of attempts were. It's more polished, and it's more like the album, which they sort of kind of continue from there.
So the next batch of songs, you're going from Ed songs where he's playing guitar, which is not a new thing, but it's becoming a more permanent thing at the time, to Jeff getting back on his stand-up bass and doing the combo, very obviously, Daughter and Glorified G back to back. And Daughter is important from this because you have to think of what the show was being played for, the vote for choice. And he starts singing a bad radio song called Sick of Pussies. And we've talked about this before. And I really wish Patrick were here because Patrick knows, I've talked to him about it before. My body's nobody's body but mine, like that whole lyric stems from like a children's song. And I can't remember who wrote that. I can't remember who the artist is that did that, but that's where that all stems from. But Ed doing it here is a clear statement of what they're here to promote.
Nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, you run your own body, you run your own body, let me run mine.
Peter Alsop, I think, is the original
Yes.
artist there. But to your point, I mean, talk about a perfect daughter tag for this show, and Gloria Steinem being there, and women's rights, and some of the speeches he does later on. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer that would be the tag. As important as that is too, I mean, you'll probably get to this in a second here, but the speech after daughter is one of the more important ones of the entire show, along the lines of what we're talking about here. I mean, it's essentially when Jack Irons is introduced to the fans as like, hey, here's our guy.
Yeah, this is really the first time. And Ed addresses, he says that Gloria Steinem was out there earlier and mentioned his name, and there were some boos, strangely enough. And I think that kind of, Dave A had a fan base.
And as Eddie says, though, he's got his boys back, right? He's like, Jack Irons saved the life of this band. So clearly, like, there's this admission that it's easy to go back now as fans and go, oh, Jack sort of saved the band, but you hear it from Eddie firsthand right there, like him admitting there's this sense of like, would we be here if Dave was still in the band? And say we will. I love Dave's playing too, but I think Jack was needed at that time, and there's Eddie clearly saying it. Maybe he was getting a little ticked off by the response of some people, but it's plain as day.
Yeah, and I can see that because when you want to move forward, and you kind of want a different identity within your band, and you'll still hear it from people nowadays. They're still all over Dave A. That they can't give it up. That the band basically ended once Dave A left the band, which is obviously not true. Every era of the band has something to absolutely love and cherish. But people attach that because he was the legitimate rock star of the band. He was the one that went to award shows. He was the one that hung out after shows and signed autographs and took pictures. So he was relatable and people kind of gravitated towards him. And even if you're on Facebook now, like I'm friends with him on Facebook, he kind of knows who I am, not really that well, but if I messaged him, he'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I know who you are. And he's easily accessible. Nobody else in the band is that easily accessible. So he's a person that I think a lot of this fan base was able to relate to, and they took it hard. And that's, look, understandable. But I think for a lot of people that stuck on No Code and Forward, they quickly got over the fact that Dave A was it, and they found ways to absolutely love Jack, then found ways to absolutely love Matt as well.
I agree. I think having been a fan for all these years as well, I don't care about the discussion anymore. Like the who is the better drummer here and there. I think there are times where I think, this drummer here was better for this song and this one for this song. And, we've had those discussions before, but I think in general, like, I love what all three of the main guys have done over the years. It's, to your point, like, I don't think we're here having this conversation without Dave, and we're not here having this conversation without Jack kind of playing the bridge drummer for 3 years before Matt joined the band. So I love them all. There's a reason why you and I are having this conversation right now, and talking about Jack's first show is sort of fitting for that discussion for sure.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So I have a little bit on Glorified Gene. Now, Glorified Gene in this era was not really known to be like a Jack song per se. There were a couple songs where Jack wasn't really in his wheelhouse on it. I thought that Glorified G, because it's not a very hard hitting song. It's got a weird kind of countryish riff to it. It didn't quite fit his style and talents. And once you get out of 1995, they really don't do it anymore. There's the obvious from San Diego glorified version of I Hate This Song. So it was something that Eddie wasn't feeling at the time either. But there are a couple songs in the Jack era from Verses and 10 that I feel like Jack isn't the best option for. And I just don't think that this one quite fit the wheelhouse of what they wanted to do with Jack.
Yeah, maybe not a song that, to your point, like we were saying earlier, maybe not a song that I typically think of. Oh, let me go listen to some Jack versions. I will say I do like the bridge in this version, and I do love Eddie and Stone singing the ending of the bridge. I think there's perfect harmonies there. Pretty soon after this, Eddie would not sing all the kind of fiery parts, but this one they kind of do the whole thing justice. So I think harmony wise and singing wise, maybe they make up for a little bit of Jack, like maybe not being in his element on that song. But I agree with you on that one. Maybe not a song I go for when someone says play me something that's in Jack's wheelhouse. I don't think I think of Glorified G a whole lot.
So in between here, you're going to go into another Versus song with Stone real quick says this is dedicated to Dave Abruzes actually. And this is a song that he helped write, which is Go. And I don't know if there's any play on words like don't go on us or anything like that. There seemed to be, especially Ed, very, very happy with Jack. I don't really know how the rest of the band was feeling, but they certainly went along with it. I know that like Mike and Dave had a really good friendship and that kind of dissolved after a little bit, but I don't know if that's Stone trying to give Dave one last nod before moving forward. And I don't think they'll ever mention his name at a show again unless it's like way into the distant future, right?
Yeah, the next time I can think of them mentioning him by name was at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. You're right. So Stone kind of says like dedicated to Dave. I wonder if that was a little jab by Stone because wasn't it Stone that had to tell Dave he didn't have a
Yes.
job anymore? So maybe that was Stone's way of being like, all right, I got it off my chest.
Right, right. Ed made him do it, and I think
Yeah,
that's something that Davis talked about before, that he was just like, "I can't believe that it was Ed's decision, but he was too much of a coward to come forward," and,
yeah.
that's something that nobody has really talked about at length on Pearl Jam's side, so I don't wanna go too deeper into that, but the 3 songs that are in this section right here, back to back to back, are the aforementioned Go, Deep, and Black. What really piqued your interest here? I think I have a little bit on Black, but what was the standout for you?
I love a couple elements of both of those songs. So Deep, Eddie is doing, I always kind of call it his antagonizing version of Deep, where he's not singing it kind of straight through. He's doing like the, yeah, in too deep. He's kind of, I feel like he's always like
Right.
toying with the crowd the way he sings it that way. So I love the way he does that. And I also love how the slide guitar sounds on that.
One of the things I noticed with Deep is obviously this was a Dave A staple in 1993, 1994, where they would do the descent into madness at the end. And a little bit of what Stone is kind of holding on to is sort of that sound. And I don't know if that's something that they were thinking about keeping and they just didn't really rehearse it with Jack or anything like that. But I always felt like those moments that did happen with Dave just kind of came naturally. And once they did it one time, they figured out how to do it another time. It just sort of became the thing that they did. But it sounds like Stone is still hanging on to that a little bit, but it does not make
Yeah.
the descent into madness that we know of great versions in 1993 especially have.
So there's 2 songs that I always say that about. There's Deep and there's Habit. And I love when they end and I always kind of say like disintegrate into chaos. And you're right, this one doesn't quite hit that. I think they do that again with some of the later versions of Deep, but this one, like, it kind of teases and almost gets there and then just sort of peters out. It doesn't quite do what to your, like, I love those just angry chaos. The slide guitar is building and Eddie's screaming and there's all sorts of, reverb and echo and stuff going on. And this one doesn't quite do that. And then Black, right? So the next song, I love how Eddie's voice is kind of very chill, especially in the second verse. And then Mike
Yeah.
starts throwing in, you can tell Mike is starting to think of Black in a different way in these sort of earlier 95 versions. he's doing some kind of nice, tasteful licks behind Eddie singing. It's very tastefully done. He's not ready to take over control of soloing on the song yet. It's a nice early version for Mike soloing to kind of set the stage for the centerpiece that it would become, like even just later on the tour. I mean, you've heard me talk, I love that San Jose version where he just goes off like a rocket ship. But I do love Eddie doing the We Belong Together tag and Mike kind of throwing down behind him. It's a good one. It's like a stretched out, almost 6-minute version, which is an early long version for Black, right? You think of Black before this tour, and it's usually, well, how good was Eddie's voice, and did he do a tag, a We Belong Together, or something interesting like Atlanta or whatever. But 95 is where Mike starts coming into play, and I think this is an early version where you're kind of like, oh, okay, is this where this is going to go from? Is Mike going to start being a center point? And indeed, yes.
I think that's a really good point that you have there, because I was thinking a lot of the same things with Eddie, especially in that second verse, where I know it's not directly from Unplugged, but you know it from Unplugged, so I'm surrounded by, like, you know of him to do that, and he was doing it every single night, almost through 1994. Maybe some nights he would do something else, but, like, that's what you knew of the song live. And here, it's a little bit more subdued. It's not obvious raw emotion that he's sharing from it, but it's still a little bit more emotional. And you are absolutely right about Mike. And I really did feel it on this version that he was really starting to take over and make it his own. Because I think in this era too, Mike just starts to get more confident when he plays. And that's not to say that in the first couple years of this band that he wasn't necessarily confident, but like, I think he understands his talent, or is starting to in 1995. And a lot of going out and playing with Mad Season, I'm sure, probably helped expand his horizons a little bit. But yeah, this is really the start of him trying to be a bigger piece. And when you talk about Eddie as well doing that We Belong Together tag, it's not one of these we belong. He's taking the back seat from that idea of the song. And I think that just happened with a lot of the 10 songs, that he was, I don't know if they were like tired of some of the 10 songs. I know that they've said things about Jeremy and they said things about Alive before that made you feel like, okay, maybe they're just kind of over it. And I wonder if Black just kind of, I don't know if it's because they had so many songs from Vitalogy where Ed needed to use that raw emotion, but it seemed like this had become more subdued. And then once you get into the Cameron era, mid-2000s, it starts to light everything up again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple moments of that during this show and then throughout this tour where that sort of vibe of maybe loosening up where things might have been heavier early on. I think the next song, if we want to lead into it, Rearview Mirror, has the same sort of thing, right? I think you think of the Dave versions and that song comes out hot, right? I think it's always just kind of in your face, but it usually stuck to sort of the vibe of the song. And I think this was, again, another one where I know an early version from this tour that everyone had, the Melbourne, the March 17th show. I remember getting that show as one of my early 95 shows and then listening to the breakdown section in Rearview Mirror and going, oh, this is kind of different. This sort of melodic playing around, almost like Grateful Dead-y, Allman Brothers-esque thing going on where there's an interplay, but it's not really fiery. It's not really like a crazy energy version. And this is one of those for sure. There's sort of that melodic breakdown in the middle that you would hear a lot more in February and March. And I think, to your point, it's like, this is a different Rearview Mirror, just like Black was a different Black than you would have heard even just a year ago. Like March 94, these would have been much different songs. And I think it's very clear that like this is a band that's starting to branch out into some different territories, even with their early stuff. Like everything's going on a different journey now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of it from Ed's end is that he just wants to be pushed in a different direction. He wants to test some of the limits as to where they can go, and just also a little bit sort of not be obvious Pearl Jam, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're expecting this thing from us, and it's not who we are anymore. We're kind of evolving, and I think this was the beginning of we're going on a ride, and we want you to come with us, but if you don't, we understand. And obviously like that would come to a head, I think, with sort of no code, where people are like, what is happening here? But you can hear them mellowing out. Whether you want to say for better or worse, it's not the point, but you can hear them sort of mellowing out and thinking in different musical terms, even with the kind of earlier songs. That's where they were going. And I think this is like an early kind of showcase of that for sure.
Oh, the ending of River Mirror is just an absolute blaze coming out of that bridge. It's a fairly quicker bridge, around like 30 seconds or so. But, I mean, it's an epic sounding version when the music is just filling the speakers and they're on top of it. And you can tell, like, this is going to be another one that Jack really feels the impact for. And you hear him on it. And this is his first time playing it. So already they're in a good spot. I'll have to go back to this little speech before River Mirror real quick. And Ed says, so was it a good night? I've had a couple of good conversations on the side in between bands. One guy, we were talking about how 20 years ago, back in the 70s, there's such a difference between real life and the bands played in huge arenas and you couldn't touch that. If you were to play in your hometown at a local bar or something like that, it would have to be covers. You couldn't express yourself on a small level because how you would ever get to those places. We were talking about those things and how those things have changed. And hopefully now you can feel like you can do this. You can do what we do. It's almost easy. And he plays a little bit of Not For You. And he's like, it's the same, you know, you don't have to move your hands really. You can just do this. And you stand up for pro-choice too. We have to thank everybody for coming down, Lisa Germano, L7, and we might not be here if it's not for them. And then Dan Peters from Mudhoney, who filled in for D from L7, and they wouldn't be here if not for him. And he thanks Neil and Crazy Horse, obviously. Not only did he come and brought all of his stuff, his piano and all of his guys, but it's been a real joy to spend time with him and Gloria Steinem. You better appreciate these people who are going to look out for you, or else no one's going to do it. She's looked out for all the women out there. Now, enough from me. You know why we're here. We appreciate you coming and sending postcards. Tell the other people who couldn't be here that we wish they were here. I think that kind of ties in a little bit to what we were just saying, that he's suggesting here. At one point, you couldn't necessarily venture out and kind of get experimental. Like if you were playing, you know, say they were playing in Seattle and they were still like a young band or something like that. Seattle may be a little bit different, but maybe in some other territories, LA or something like that, where you just want people to just gravitate towards you so that you play them something familiar. And I think that's his way of saying, like, we're very excited to branch out here. And if we can do that, if we can be a little bit experimental and work with what we have, then it's something that you guys can do too. So it's a little bit of here's where we're at, but also like kind of giving a little push to the future generation of rock stars who was in that audience. I don't know if anybody was, but same kind of idea.
Yeah, just two quick points to that speech. You know, when he does that whole, you know, you can do this too, and he starts playing Not For You and whatever, like this band is the reason why I play guitar to this day, right? I mean, I'm a huge music fan. I love a ton of bands and whatever, but I play guitar because of this band. I play guitar because of, you know, watching them on Saturday Night Live and Unplugged and collecting bootlegs and trying to learn these songs that I just love. So like, he's right. I mean, it's approachable too. A lot of their music, some of it can be a little trickier. Javier, don't take note of that because I know you can probably play everything, but some of it can be a little tricky, at least for me. And then just sort of on a different note too, when he says, you know, she's looked out for all the women out there. And I was thinking earlier today and I was like, it's kind of crazy how relevant that still is 30 years later. We should be on, I don't want to get political here, but like we should be on a lot of the shit we're dealing with right now and women's rights and the fact that they were talking about this at this show and that Gloria Steinem being there and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. It kind of made me a little bit depressed earlier today, thinking about putting some notes together and being like, God, they could do that show again today. And he could say the same thing about her, that she's looking for women out there and it would still hold up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's unfortunately where we sit. And good Lord, I don't think I want to expand on that because you're right. It is a very depressing topic and just not somewhere that I want to take this podcast right now. So
Nope.
a place where I would like to take this podcast right now is the closer for the main set, Immortality. Immortality would close the main set a little bit in 1995, play around a little bit, and not close with like this massive show-stopping song like they were doing with Alive or Porch in years prior. This is like Pearl Jam wanting to put together a new identity. Immortality closing out a set before coming back for an encore is telling you that these are the songs that they're going to focus on. These are the songs that are going to define the 1995 era. And as I was saying before, this was, and if not equivocally, is probably the best live song from 1995. And the reason why is because of the ending jams that happened.
Yeah.
And Jack just absolutely going apeshit. And I think there are better renditions of this where we can give you examples of that. However, they do start to pick it up a little bit, and you're starting to see and hear Jack kind of go off. It's not extended like some other versions are, where I can't remember if it was like Las Cruces or something like that, where Jack was absolutely unhinged. It was one of those September shows, I think, but you're starting to see it kind of form together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Immortality, it's to your point, right? They inserted it there at a very important part of a set, right? To end the main set there. They almost know, right, this is going to be one of those songs that's going to sort of take over and kind of have a life of its own at some point. I think when I listen to Immortality, I always listen for, obviously a few different things, right? How does Eddie sound and whatever, but there's the three kind of sections. There's the first chill solo section, there's the main solo where Mike always sort of soars, and then there's the ending one, which is sort of the crescendo jam. I think this one I sort of broke down, like the first one is chill. It's almost like the album version. It's very chill, kind of harmonics being played. The main one, you can tell Immortality is not quite what it's going to be, even in a few weeks. Like there's some of the ones from March that are pretty good too, but it's a very chill main solo. Mike takes over, and like I'm so conditioned to like, okay, is he gonna soar? Is he gonna like hit that note and just melt faces and delay pedal going crazy? And this one is good. It's still not a full-on assault, right? It's still not Mikey being Mikey during that main solo. And then to your point, I think that ending jam builds to a very nice crescendo, and that's where Jack gets to shine on this song. Some of my favorite Immortalities, some of the ones even from 98 are some of my favorites as well. That's where he sort of shines, is that ending part there. And I think this one definitely ends nicely.
once we cover more shows from 1995, this will be a highlight as we go. So we'll kind of maybe do a little bit of an evolution on that as the year goes on. So definitely listen up for more immortality. All right, we're at the encore break. So let's pause for station identification real quick. And I'll give you guys some info if you guys want to donate to the show and help out and join our Patreon, then you are free to do so. All you got to do is go to the website, patreon.com/live on four legs, or you can actually go and download the app Patreon and search for Live on Four Legs, and you can go and join that way, or you can go to liveonfourlegs.com and click the Become a Patron button at the top, and that's how you can join. And anything counts here. Every little donation will help, and it'll help the podcast. It'll help us grow. It'll help us get to shows and extra travel amenities and things like that. It's really, really important. Right now, I'm only going to one show. I'm going to obviously hammer down Florida. As I said last week, Florida, Florida, Florida. So it's, Jason Weiss, if you're listening, I'm going to get that into your brain right now. I kid, but I really don't. I want to be there. But yeah, I mean, can you blame me? I really wanted to make Pittsburgh work, but I mean, the timing that I was going to be in North Carolina during Raleigh 2 anyway just was kind of a miracle. So,
Yeah.
and I'm going to a wedding the day before Pittsburgh 2, and I was trying to make it work out where I would take a flight to Pittsburgh, and that got the kibosh put right down on it. So, but my tickets are going to good people, and I'm happy for them, and they'll bring me back some stickers and shit like that, and I'll be happy. But going back to Patreon, this is a perfect time to join because this will get you everything from the year, and we're going to continue to put together more content. As I mentioned, you guys, I'm going to get on your ass for this year and do more hallucinogenic recipe stuff for sure, especially with 1995 and an anniversary year. But also the Gear Garage is coming up pretty soon. I know I keep saying that every week, but it is on the way. And there are little things that are going to come up. And we've been doing a set list to Eggman, and that stuff might be exclusive to Patreon at some point. And we'll think of other things. But also, one of the selling points for doing this podcast is that we want to hear from you and hear your stories. So in order to do that, we get requests all the time, but I tell people, look, people have signed up to both the Giggle Leg tier and the Horizon Leg tier and have gotten their requests. And that's how we've been doing it for a long time. So if you want to have a show covered and have your story told, then that's the best way to do it. We've had so many good shows that people have requested. And those are always the best because something like this show, I think it's kind of on our minds because it was something that was pretty important in 1995, but there are some shows that are going to come up in the next month or two request wise that I don't know if we'd ever touch up on. I mean, at some point we would have, but like just thinking of it ourselves, we wouldn't be like, hey, that show, we got to do that one. But it's because of your stories that we can implement these shows and get some more shows under our belt too, because that's it. The final goal at the end of this is to have every single show covered. It's going to take us 100 years, but we'll wait for it. So if that's something that you want to do, join up on the Giggle Leg or Horizon Leg tier. That's $5 and $10 a month. The Horizon Leg tier goes into our website funding on liveonfourlegs.com. So yeah, that's all good things, guys. And as we keep going, we'll just keep talking about the tour upcoming, and it's gonna be a couple months, but I think this has already turned out to be a pretty good year for 2025. So, all right, we got 3 songs left. So let's get back into the rock. Blood is dedicated for Leanne and Shannon, I believe. I don't know who those people are. Do you have information that I don't have?
I do not know who they are, unfortunately. Have nothing to add there.
All righty. So it's for them. And the dichotomy between Blood and Indifference back to back here. Indifference is not going to be the show closer, but it's interesting that they go in this direction to have two completely different songs. But Blood, Ed is doing his patented mic stand smash into the ground, and he's doing these like screaming gestures into the mic, like kind of like a hawk or something like that. Kind of like a bird just keeps going. Kind of like, I don't know, the Forrest Gump scene, kind of almost. I don't know. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. He's got that sort of grunting thing going right where he's sitting. Yeah, we won't go to the Forrest Gump scenario there, but I know where you're going. I was also thinking Rain Man there, but that's a different thing. No, I think you got the angry grunting Ed thing going on in the breakdown section, and I love how Jack catches onto it and starts hitting, kind of pounding the drums along with him. That's kind of a cool little moment there. And the other thing I love about this version of Blood too is that, again, I feel like I say this a lot about kind of this show and some of these earlier ones, but there's a little hint of what's to come with Blood later on in the year with the ending jams. I mean, I think this version only clocks in at like 3 minutes. It's not a long one, but you can hear that they're starting to play around with that vibe and that sort of feedback kind of energy there. And I think there's just sort of hints of what those ending jams in Blood, because some of those ones coming up, like Soldier Field and San Jose, start getting in the 7-8 minute mark there. This one's not there, but it's got the signs of what it's going to be pretty soon. So I think that's pretty cool.
It's no Istanbul, that's for sure.
No.
I am still very obsessed with that Istanbul version because obviously it does not come from a quality bootleg, as we covered about a month or two ago. So when hearing it and seeing that the file was 8 minutes long, I'm like, oh, well, this is at the end of the main set, so half of that is just going to be the encore break, right? Well, no. Nope. So yeah, it doesn't have that much of an extension, but yeah, the ending jam just smokes on this, and Ed sort of takes a back seat and just kind of watches the band go off as they're creating this like progressively like loud noise infusion, and it sounds terrific. Ed says in between, as long as you're all here, we're going to stick around for a few minutes. We don't get together like this very often, and that is going to get you into Indifference here. Very stark version, and they were still filling in that identity where it was not one of these versions where you would sing along with or house lights or anything like that. It was in the darkness and had a lot of tension build up, and then the crowd is all over it. The crowd claps along and they're really into it, and I think at this point it's right on the verge where we get to see during the summer Indifference is going to start taking the back seat to Yellow Ledbetter. So this is right around the time that transition is going to be made, but Indifference is still kind of the same personality with or without Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this version just definitely makes me jealous of people who were there. I think you can just sort of feel and hear the mood in the room. Even if you're not watching, you can sort of feel it. And I love the crowd response after Eddie does the "I'll scream my lungs out till it fills this room." I think like the crowd definitely, I mean, that's always a cool moment during that song anyway, but I think it just really cool version there for sure. You know, as you were saying, it sort of has a different vibe maybe than it normally does. And I think it definitely plays off of the self-pollution version from just a few days earlier, which is a very subdued version. I think this one has a little more energy than that, but isn't maybe necessarily the version that you would have heard, again, just like a year earlier. I think it's got its own vibe.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And once you get into, I can't remember what year it was. It was either, I don't know if it was 96 or 98, but Indifference was so rare to hear in a show. Like they only played it like 3 times one of those tour years. So, you know, this is around the time where you're starting to see the beginning of the end. And as we know, this year they only played it 3 times this year. So that's really lacking for a song like that has had such a rich history within Setlist. So Ed invites Neil out. Stone starts playing a little riff as sort of Neil's intro song that I guess kind of sounds like it could be an extension in like a parallel universe. Like if they finished up a song like Tremor Christ and kept playing, it kind of sounds like it could fit in a little bit. So that was an interesting little improv that they did there. And Neil says here, I'd like to thank Jam. It doesn't say Pearl Jam. I'd like to thank Jam for asking me and Crazy Horse to come here and play for you tonight. Now we're going to see how they can play when they have no idea what the song is before we start. They do. I've heard it a couple of times. Was that an okay, Neil?
Not bad, man. Not bad. I'll take it.
All right. So yes, the last song of this show is going to be a song that before Mirrorball is really a thing, they're going to play Active Love. And again, like we mentioned, it was played at the Hall of Fame. That's such a Neil thing to do, to like not play like Heart of Gold or something like at his, celebration, that he's going to play a brand new song. And I think it's like a 10-minute version or whatever. That happened to be with Crazy Horse, but the band, I think the story goes that you were telling me beforehand was that the band had recorded that version, went back and listened to it a couple times, and that's kind of what happened. I believe from what we read as well, that song X had been played in the Neil and Crazy Horse set earlier in the night. I was trying to look for it earlier and again, we couldn't find it, but I mean, that could be something that you want to get a hold of right there. But, initially, look, it's not a song that they've gone into the studio with yet. They've only heard it, as he said, a couple of times, and they're a little confused with it at first, but that's kind of, part of learning while you're on Neil Young's stage. They're pros, but it's still got to be a little bit intimidating because Neil is such a presence and Neil kind of demands perfection in a way. And I know that, like, if they fuck up a measure or something like that, Neil isn't gonna berate them or anything like that. But, like, they respect the fucking hell out of him. We don't call him Uncle Neil because he's just a musician that they like. They want to impress him, and they do. They would end up recording an album very shortly after this, but he's right. It is a work in progress, and they kind of ring into like that familiar jam. It kind of evolves into it after about a minute or so, and once you hear that dun, 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 you're really able to kind of feel like the direction for the song. Definitely needs work, because when you put this up against what the studio recording is off of Mirrorball, Neil does not sound anything like his vocal runs in the song that we know today. Like, they're a lot more aggressive. They're very, I wouldn't say like laid back in the recording, but like they kind of have the Neil flutter to them. And this was just kind of Neil putting a little bit more like oomph and emphasis to. And I wonder if that was just him trying to figure out what identity the song has too, but it felt a lot more aggressive than we know.
Yeah, I think he's also finding his way with that song, and who knows how many times he's, played that before. But just based on listening to that, I'm going to guess only a couple times, and it doesn't sound like he has that song down yet either, right? So I think like the band is feeling him out. To your point, they kind of probably want to impress him. They're kind of feeling each other out. Obviously, they'd played before, Rockin' in the Free World at the MTV Awards, but no, I think it's like for a first time played. I think there's the advantage of it's a song that doesn't have a lot of chords in it. And I play this every once in a while, and there's really a couple chords in the verses and a couple in the choruses. So once you get the pattern down, it's fine. But for a band to essentially like kind of record it and listen to it and kind of have a vibe for it, you can tell like Jam is almost locked in with it. It's a little rough around the edges. There's a couple of transitions where I can't quite tell, but someone's still, hanging on a G when it's supposed to be an A or whatever. But I think throughout all that, right, throughout Pearl Jam kind of mucking up the chords here and there, and Neil taking some vocal liberties, there is an unmistakable fire to it. There's a vibe to it for sure that sort of shows maybe what Neil heard and said, like, I think we have something here. I think he clearly caught something there throughout all the rough edges and mess ups that made him go, I'm going to see what these guys are made of. So he heard something there for sure.
Well, he is front and center on this, and Neil's really into this. Neil has perfected that style of strumming, kind of the short arm strumming, and it felt like the patented Stone strumming. Is it that different than the Neil strum? Maybe it's a little wider, but I mean, I think it's kind of a little bit of an homage, right? Just kind of like that.
I mean, they're
stiffness almost.
They're very similar players. I think if you listen to Bayleaf, Stone's first solo album, the actual song itself too, the namesake of the album, he's got a Neil vibe to him, I think for sure. When I listen to we were talking earlier about the Corduroy Jam, and in general, when I say that Pearl Jam has a jam here or there, or like, oh, that version is almost Neil Young-esque, usually what I'm saying is Stone has a Neil Young vibe there. It's not Mike. Mike's a much different player.
Sure. No, absolutely. Mike would kind of fit more in with what Crazy Horse is doing. And yeah, right. Stone kind of has that same rhythmic pattern and songwriting technique that Neil has. And I think a lot of that probably put them in a good position to work together, because it seemed pretty seamless. When you listen to that record, it simultaneously feels like both a Neil Young and Pearl Jam record. And
exactly.
It only doesn't feel like a Pearl Jam record because Ed isn't on it. But like, take Neil's vocals out and throw in Ed's and you get it. Like, he found a way to get the best out of this band, and kind of from that aspect, I think he was also looking to get the other members outside of Ed to be involved with something, because it was very Ed heavy. Everything was Ed all the time. And I think Neil wanted to be like, all right, well, we can use Stone, we can use Jeff, we can use Mike and Jack, and like give them a little bit of a lesson outside of recording with Ed. And again, going back to the performance, they're just having so much fun with this. Ed is sort of taking the back seat. He's over at Mike's side. He's doing some of the backing vocals, while Stone and Jeff are also doing backing vocals together. And the collaboration is just exactly what you expect from this era. And I have to say this because I wanted to make the pun, but Neil's very, very into it, and he's got all the old Neil moves, and his head is shaking because he's shaky. So, all right. Now they close out by saying thank you, see you tomorrow, and don't forget to vote. Don't forget to cause trouble. Just do it peacefully. See you around. Not a bad show at all to get you kicked off for 1995. Now let's do the thing where we pick a couple of moments that we want to go back on and say that they were our favorites. So pick a top 3 here.
So I think my top 3 moments here, I'm going to go with, I think, the pacing and the groove of Tremor Christ, like we were talking about. I think it's just got this nice plodding along, tribal kind of thing, and I think Jack fits in perfectly. For an early song in Jack's first full show, I think that maybe preceded by Last Exit, where Jack kind of finds his groove after a little rocky start to Spin the Black Circle, and he doesn't have to do a lot in release, but I think Tremor Crisis is really Jack being like, I'm here. I think another highlight has to be Corduroy. Like I said, I think that's maybe my favorite Eddie vocal version of Corduroy, and then it's got that kind of down and dirty Neil Young-esque, again, I mean Stone, right? But has that sort of Neil Young-esque ending jam style there. And also, like I said, I love the way Jack sort of plays the intro there and plays along with Eddie's guitar part there. And then how do you not have Active Love as the third thing to point out? I think what else is there to say about Active Love? There's a reason why we just had a discussion about Mirrorball and Neil Young and the whole thing, and I think it's because of this version here, warts and all, where Neil heard something, the band heard something, and within a couple of weeks they were off recording an entire album, which is some pretty powerful stuff. So those are the three I'm going to go with.
Yeah, when you can kind of transcend history, it's kind of be hard to leave a moment like that off.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with my number 3 is going to be Rearview Mirror from this show. I just thought it was just hitting such a good sweet spot. It grooved really well, and then just epic sounding. I think it just still had that epic feel of where they left off with Dave, and it was a fantastic version. I'm going to go number 2 and say Active Love instead of number 1. I think it's probably the most important moment from the show. But in terms of performance, Corduroy was my favorite performance from this show because you get Stone absolutely wailing away from the solo. I mean, out of 500 plus versions of Corduroy that have been played, you maybe get 3 times that Stone has soloed there. So that's a major highlight for me. And not only that he actually did it, but he was fucking phenomenal on it. So that brings us up to the rating moment. Now, this is, again, I think when you think of 1995, not like top notch. Obviously, there were some hiccups with still figuring out what they had with Jack a little bit, but this is a very, very good show. So where do you have it? What are you going to rank it?
So I think to your point, right? I think this is a show that is maybe not a top tier show. It's short. It's got some great moments to it. It was meant to be part of kind of a bunch of other bands playing, and it wasn't going to be a full 20 or 25 song Pearl Jam show. I think with all the moments in this, I think it being Jack's first show, I think to your point, the Corduroy and Jack's playing on Last Exit and Stone soloing all over the place, Not For You and Corduroy. There's some really cool moments here, Black and Rearview Mirror and Immortality. There's not a real down moment here. A couple of hiccups here or there, obviously Active Love, warts and all. I'm going to give this one because it sets the stage for the Vitalogy tour. It's Jack's first full show with the band. I got to elevate it a little bit there and go somewhere in the maybe 7.5, somewhere around there. It's an important one. I think that sort of elevates it. I'm not sure it's one I think you said it earlier. It's maybe not one that I throw on a whole lot and go back to a ton, but I think there's a lot here. And I think it's an important one for fans to listen to if you're digging into like important shows. It's a pretty high one for just those reasons. So yeah, I'm gonna go fairly high there for a bunch of reasons.
Okay, I didn't expect you to go with a 7.5. Like, I feel like when you said fairly high, I'm like 8 or 9s. Like, but that's okay. I mean, that's
Think of the tour that's about to unfold and all those moments there, and the Melbourne
Yeah.
show and Soldier Field. It's you have to start. To me, a 7.5 is a pretty solid show.
Oh yeah, for sure. I tell people that all the time. Like, you don't want to sleep on the 7.5s. There needs to be something that puts it at another level to get to an 8, and that's kind of where I am. I think I'm at an 8.5 on this one. I think it really does hit the spot with just getting your feet wet with Jack and like getting to see what he would do for the year. It's not by any means the best show of 1995. It has the notable factor of Active Love and the development of Mirrorball. That's really important. I think that pushes my rating up a little bit too. But yeah, 8.5, I think is right in the wheelhouse there. There's some very, very good performances. And like you said, you were right. No down moment. There's not a performance where I'm like, well, okay, this kind of put a damper on the set. Like, the only one that I was a little bit meh on was Glorified G, but it didn't do that. It still had like the personality and the energy to it. So I will give this one an 8.5.
They average out to an 8.0 with our ratings. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I'll take that. Look, I think that's kind of when you get to a certain point, like, yes, you want to listen to all these. You want to listen to all these and you want to take all of them in. But like, I think the rating factor is used as more of an urgency factor of like, hey, do you want to go and listen to this right now? Is it that good where it needs to be a 10 to listen to right now? Or do you want to pick this up at another time where you have other listening priorities? And I think that kind of fits in a little bit above that. Like, yeah, go check some stuff out. Definitely go check out the highlights that we mentioned. But look, if you're going to go listen to a 1995 show and have us give you that show to listen to, this isn't going to be the first one, but it'll be in the mix for sure. Well, next week we are going to go to our first official request of the year. I believe it's coming from Dawn and Simon Mortimer, and their request is Lexington, Kentucky 2016. That has a set list that fits right in with what they were doing on the 2016 tour. Songs like Education and just a lot of good versions. And it might be like an unsung show of that tour because everybody wants to talk about Greenville and everybody wants to talk about Toronto and Philly, but people don't usually quite go back to Lexington. And maybe next week will be a little bit of a reason why we can push you in the right direction to be like, yeah, you should listen to the show because it's a very good show.
Good poster.
Amazing poster. Yes.
Yeah.
The Magnificent Six is
yep.
I think probably S tier, top tier poster of all time. Absolutely.
100%.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. And if this is your first time listening, then welcome. Hopefully you will get to enjoy other podcasts that we have, 316 other ones to be somewhat accurate. You can go back on any of the podcast platforms and listen on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube. They're all there. They're all available. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure you give us a little bit of a rating because that helps us in the algorithm when you're searching for Pearl Jam podcasts. You want us to come up. And along with that, you also want people to go through and see the comments and see what people think about their show. So if you want to leave a comment too, that'll be very, very, very helpful. With that being said, this may be the end. We're here, but not for much longer, although we may be parting ways. Miss you already. Miss you always. Brian, thank you for coming in and filling in today. This was a joy. I don't think we've ever done just a podcast between the two of us before. So this is new, and I will have to, don't tell Patrick, but I'll have to keep you in mind for the next time that we need a guest host. We'll leave Patrick out again.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Javier, anytime you want to take a vacation or do whatever you're doing, I'm happy to fill in. But no, Randy, I appreciate it. This was a fun one. And thanks for having me on.
And you guys will do some more hallucinogenic recipe episodes in 2025. If
yes,
it's life or death.
We're on it. I promise.
All right, guys. Until Lexington next week. See you on the pod.
So I got this song that I do. It's being used in self-protection programs all over this country and in Canada and in Australia and Great Britain. I'll teach it to you. Some of you know it. Yeah, okay. Sing it with me. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine. Good. My nose was made to sniff and to sneeze, to smell what I want, you ready? And to pick when I please. Come on, pick 'em. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine. Good. My mouth was made to blow up a balloon. I can eat, kiss, and spit. I can whistle. Let's whistle one. Come on, do it again. Good work, all right. No one knows my body better than me. It tells me, let's eat. It tells me, go pee. So don't hit me Don't kick me, don't push or shove, don't hug me too hard when you show me your love, 'cause my body's nobody's body but mine. Good, sing. You run your own body, let me run mine. Well, for a long time, kids didn't know they had the right to say no to grown-ups. No, we don't teach kids just to say no to grown-ups, because grown-ups aren't real big on that part of the program. What we do is we teach kids that they're the stewards of their own bodies, Well, let's see, for instance, now, raise your hand if someone ever tickled you too much. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, look at all those hands, my God. My dad used to tickle me too much, and one time he tickled me too much in front of a bunch of my friends. Guess what happened? What did I do to my pants? Yeah, you're right, I sure did. I was so embarrassed. It wasn't any fun. A little bit of tickling is fun, but that was not fun. Okay, raise your hand if someone ever hugged you too hard. Let's see who you are. Yeah, look at that. I used to have this Aunt Ethel. She'd come to our house and she'd talk to my parents the whole time we were there. And then just before she'd leave, she'd say, "Oh, Peter, it's been so good seeing you, dear. My, how you've grown." And she'd give me this big, wet, sloppy kiss and a hug, Well, that wasn't any fun either. So what we teach kids is that since they're the stewards of their own bodies, they got to take care of their own bodies. And if someone's tickling you too much, or hugging you too hard, or touching you in any way you don't like, you got a right to say, "No, don't do that. I don't like it. Please stop," no matter who it is. If that big person doesn't stop, then go tell someone you trust and get some help, okay? Sometimes it's hard to say no and be strong. When those no feelings come, then I know something's wrong, because my body's mine from my head to my toe. So please leave it alone when you hear me say, all right, here we go. My body's nobody's body but mine. Good, sing. You run your own body, let me. Last time, harmony, come on. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own